Hello and welcome to another episode of the Influence Economy podcast. I'm your host, Shayna Davis. I'm glad you're here, but before we get started, I would love if you would do me a favor. So, wherever it is that you are listening to this episode, I want you to take a screenshot. With that screenshot, I want you to post it on LinkedIn and tag me. And then I just want to hear your biggest aha moment or your biggest takeaway from this episode. And the reason why I have that ask is because for me, far too many leaders, they really don't know how to cultivate and build the external influence that the new world demands. And the more times that these episodes are shared, it will expose them to the signals they need to develop in order to lead better. So I appreciate you in advance for being willing to do that. So let's get to it. If you've ever sent a leader to communication training or media training and thought, why didn't that land the way that I expected? This episode is for you because I'm going to say something that might irritate a few executive programs. And that's this: communication training is not the first step, leadership identity is. And until that's clear, you're polishing a message that doesn't know what it stands for. So I was at an event yesterday, packed room, big industry energy, panels, networking, the whole thing. And as I sat there listening, something became painfully obvious. There was only one leader on that stage out of at least a dozen or more throughout the day who had given any real thought, or so it seemed, to his unique point of view, to his leadership narrative. Both of those things I make up what I refer to as leadership identity. One, everyone else defaulted to talking about their company, what it's building, what it's launching, what the roadmap looks like, market positioning, product features, blah, blah, blah. All of those are fine. All of those are also safe. But only one person spoke from a clear leadership narrative. You could feel what he stood for, you could hear his conviction, you understood how he thinks, you could tell where he thought things were going and what we need to factor in order to get there. The stories aligned and really brought home the points that he was trying to share. He wasn't hiding behind the company, he was representing it. And that difference is everything. And this is where we have to separate identity from communication because most organizations approach this backwards. They think our leaders need to communicate better, and they do. When they come to me, they're like, Shayna, my leaders need communication and media training, and they do. So they send them to presentation training, they send them to media training, executive presence workshops, and then they learn body language and eye contact and voice modulation and slide design. But they skip the foundational question: who are you as a leader, independent of your title? What do you stand for? What do you believe about your industry that others don't? What tension are you willing to name publicly? Because if you don't know that, communication training just makes you sound more polished and it also makes you sound more generic. And generic is invisible. And in today's world, companies cannot afford to have leaders who are invisible because we've been living in what I call the influence economy for years now. That's why the name of this show is called that, right? Visibility, credibility, reputation, those are the currencies in the influence economy. But influence has evolved. It's not just about being seen anymore, it's about being seen as something specific, specific in conviction, specific in positioning, specific in perspective. And that specificity comes from identity. It does not come from delivery technique. Doesn't matter how camera ready, how microphone ready I get you. If you haven't done that foundational work, it's still not going to hit the way that you want it to hit. Let me explain it this way: communication training is like wardrobe styling. Fellas, just hang with me for a second. Leadership identity, you can think of that of like, that's your body. And you can tailor the suit all day long, but if there's nothing solid underneath it, no structure, no stance, no shape, it's not going to matter how expensive the fabric is. You're still going to look uncertain. And this is what's happening across executive teams right now, especially in STEM companies. Leaders are being told, you need to be more visible. So what do? They start posting on LinkedIn. They go on panels. They say yes to podcasts. But when they show up, They default to corporate talking points. They become what I call a corporate branded parrot. And that's not leadership, that's spokesperson behavior. And there's a massive difference between being the face of a company and being a leader with a point of view. One is replaceable and the other is magnetic. And the other thing happening, which is worse than the first, in my opinion, is that companies are not prioritizing getting their leaders equipped in this way at all. They wait until it becomes crisis or reputation management to care instead of actually crafting the narrative the way that they want to be perceived ahead of time. Right? I posted on LinkedIn the other day Mike Tyson's quote of everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. Well, I wish companies, especially these STEM companies, would create a plan to keep from getting punched in the face instead of waiting until they get punched in the place now to try to get punched in the face and now try to put a plan in place. Now, when I talk about leadership identity, I'm not talking about personal branding like in the fluffy sense, right? I'm talking about strategic clarity. Three things specifically. First, your intellectual position. Like, what do you believe about your market, your industry, or the future that shapes your decisions? Not your company's decisions, but your decisions. Second, your leadership philosophy. How do you think people perform at their best? What do you value in teams? What do you not what will you not tolerate? Third, your narrative arc. What experiences have shaped the way that you lead today? Because most leaders, they've lived these answers, but very few of them have articulated them. And if you can't articulate them, then you can't communicate them. Again, which it doesn't matter if I jump straight to the technical tactics of communication and media training. If you're not able to articulate the answers to those questions, your unique point of view, your leadership narrative, all these things that I consider to be your leadership identity, then you're not going to be able to communicate them regardless of what I teach you about getting in front of the camera or getting in front of the mic. Which brings me back to that panel from yesterday. The one leader who stood out, he wasn't louder. As a matter of fact, he wasn't loud at all. Spent quite a bit of time with him. He wasn't loud at all. He wasn't more charismatic. No, he wasn't boring, but he wasn't more charismatic. He wasn't louder. He wasn't more polished. But you know what he was? He was more defined. He answered questions by anchoring them to what he believes. And when they asked him about industry trends, he didn't just describe them, he interpreted them. When he was asked about competition, he didn't just position the company, he positioned his philosophy. And you could tell that he had done the internal work. And that internal work is what most communication programs ignore. That internal work is that thing that the companies are like, not my responsibility. Go figure that out on your own. Not no need to add that into my learning and development. So let's talk about why this matters now. Because we're operating in a marketplace shaped by three external pressures. And you've heard me talk about this before: a war for talent, a widening trust gap, and nonstop technological disruption. In this environment, people are not just evaluating companies, your metrics, your financial gains or losses, your product features. But you know what they are evaluating? Your leaders. Who's evaluating them? Investors, employees, customers, the media. And you know what they want to know? Who's steering this ship? And what do they actually believe? And if the only thing they hear is product updates and corporate positioning, trust doesn't deepen. It actually plateaus. It erodes even more than it may already be. Identity is what creates gravity. And gravity attracts talent. It builds loyalty. It earns media attention. It shapes markets. Communication skills amplifies the identity, but they can't manufacture it. So I'm not saying that communication skills are not important. I'm not saying that you should just throw out the baby with the bathwater and just ignore everything that your comms person is telling you. But you do need some seasoning. If you're just going to regurgitate what I can find on your website, what I can find on your brochure, I I mean, it's not going to get you as far. You need some seasoning. And that seasoning comes from your unique point of view. It comes from your leadership narrative. It comes from who you are as the leader and what it is that you stand for. That's your leadership identity. And here's the part that might sting a little. Some leaders, they avoid this identity work because it requires choosing a perspective, choosing a stance, choosing what you're willing to be known for. And choosing means that you might not appeal to everyone. But neutrality, that's not leadership. It's insulation, and insulation doesn't inspire anyone. So if you're listening to this as a senior leader or founder, here's the uncomfortable question. If someone asked your team what you stand for, not what your company does, could they answer clearly? If a journalist interviewed you tomorrow, would you default to company messaging or would you have a distinct lens? If a recruiter were pitching top talent, would your leadership identity be part of the draw? If the answer is fuzzy, communication training is not your next move. Clarity is. And that clarity requires time. It requires reflection. It requires language work. It requires tension because identity is built in tension. It's built in the gap between what you've experienced and what you've concluded from it. So let me give you something practical. If you want to start defining your leadership identity, ask yourself these 5 questions. Number one, what industry myth do I quietly disagree with? Number two, what decision have I made that best reflects how I think differently? Number three, what do I believe high performing teams actually need beyond what HR says? Number four, where have I changed my mind publicly and why? And lastly, what am I willing to say on stage that others in my position won't? And we're not talking about going rogue. We're not talking about, like creating a PR nightmare. Now, don't answer these questions quickly. I want you to sit with them because once you have those answers, that's when communication training becomes powerful. And that's why, while yes, my company, Executive Signals Group, does communication and media training, I refuse to do it if we don't do this foundational work. Because again, once you have the answers to those questions, once you've given thought to your leadership identity and you've actually crafted your unique point of view in your leadership narrative, that's when that communication and training becomes powerful. That's when it actually sticks. That's when it actually gives your organization what it needs to achieve the outcomes that you are publicly, being participating in to begin with. So now, when we start to focus on that, you're not learning how to speak, you're learning how to project. You're learning the difference between signals and noise. And that projection without identity is just noise. But that projection with identity, that's influence. So this is where we also have to redefine executive presence. I hate that term. Because for years, executive presence was about how you show up in the room, your posture, your tone, your confidence, your charisma, your clothing, all these other personality traits, if you will, instead of skills that can actually be cultivated and built. But executive presence now extends far beyond the boardroom. It's how you show up externally and the perception and the reputation that is being built as a result of how you are showing up externally on digital platforms and interviews, on panels and investor meetings, in moments of crisis, because those do arise as well. Your external presence is now part of your leadership performance standard. And if your identity is undefined, then your external presence is going to feel inconsistent. Like one week you're visionary, next week you're cautious, the next week after that you're corporate, the next week after that you're contrarian. And that inconsistency erodes trust faster than if you were just silent, which I don't recommend that either. But identity creates coherence, and that coherence is what's going to build the credibility. That's what's going to help to shrink that trust gap, that skepticism. That's also going to be what's going to help to shrink, oh, another company just came out with a bright new shiny object 3 hours ago. Because now that I know who's steering this ship and I can actually believe in the people that are steering the ship, I'm going to be less likely to be distracted by the next thing that's going to come out today, tomorrow, or the next day. So let's zoom out for a second. In the next decade, leaders are not going to be evaluated solely on operational performance. Strong product and great internal team, no longer enough just to be successful. Those are the table stakes. Your leaders, they're going to be evaluated on signal clarity. Like, what signal are you sending to the market, to talent, to your industry? If your signal is competent, you'll survive. But if your signal is clear and convicted, you'll lead. you'll be sustainable. And here's the part I want you to hear clearly: leadership identity is not ego. It's not about being performative. It's not about being fake. It's not about changing who you are. It's responsibility. Because when you occupy a position of authority, people will project meaning onto you. If you don't define it yourself, the market will, the media will, your customers will, and they're not generous. So here's your assignment this week. Before you invest in another communication workshop, before you hire another media coach, before you tell your team they need to be more visible, pause and ask, what do we stand for beyond what we sell? And what do I stand for beyond my title? Write it down, pressure test it, refine it. Because once that foundation is solid, communication becomes amplification instead of performance. And amplification is what builds influence that lasts. Because influence is not about being seen anymore. Visibility is not enough. It's about being understood deeply, specifically, and strategically. Leadership identity must come first. Everything else, that's just microphone technique. That's the easy stuff. If this episode challenged you, good. I want you to send it to a leader who needs to hear it. And if you're ready to do that identity work before the communication polish, that's exactly what we do inside this ecosystem. Because in this influence economy, the leaders who win, they won't just speak well. They'll stand for something. And people will know exactly what that is. So if you need my help with this, DM me, hit me up. We'll figure something out. I'll see you next week. Bye bye.